Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the age of the Enlightenment. We've spent a couple of days talking about the scientific revolution. We've spent a couple of days talking about absolutism and governments taking complete control and complete power and putting it all into one person. And so today we're going to talk about an influential idea that kind of comes out of both of those two things combined, and that's called the age of the Enlightenment or enlightened thought. So let's talk for a little bit about this. So first of all, we have to ask the question, what was the Enlightenment? What was it? Why are we talking about it? So the age of the Enlightenment is another way of saying the age of reason. During the scientific revolution, what you guys began to notice and what began happening was that people began to apply laws of nature, things that would happen in the natural world. What goes up must come down. If I drop this remote, it's going to fall. That's the law of gravity. The earth circles around the sun, revolves around the sun, and then rotates on its axis. Those ideas began to be put forth during the scientific revolution. Blood began flowing through the veins, things like that. Think about the scientists we talked about. And then I want you to take that and what they did. Then the next philosophical or intellectual movement was the Enlightenment, which took those natural laws and applied them to us humans. They took the laws of the natural world and applied them to our lives and to humans. Okay, so that's the way I want you to think about it, is that it is simply an extension of the scientific revolution and logic and reason in the natural world, in science, and applying it to the way that humans interact. And it's during this time period that we begin to see history as a social science coming up. Economics is now a science, a thing that is looked at, and that you can manage the economy and how people make money based on these natural laws. And naturally, political science, or the study of government and how government should interact with their people, become pretty vital and very important here. So what were some of the key points of the Enlightenment? Well, here is best illustrated a quote that is really better. It comes from the French: liberty, equality, and fraternity, or freedom, equality, everybody's the same, and brotherhood. We are all equal. And those are three of the main points, the pillars of the Enlightenment. And in the Enlightenment philosophers that we're going to talk about here in just a second really espouse or support those ideas. They really question rights, natural rights. What rights were we as humans born with? What rights do we have as individuals? What things do we have as simply being born on this earth? What are we allowed? Sovereignty is the nature of power. So we're going to look at government. And where does government get its power? And tolerance. Many people say that the age of enlightenment was the age of tolerance, and that different thoughts and ideas should be tolerated. There were some, obviously, these ideas that we're going to talk about and read about later on in class were very revolutionary. Revolutionary in fact that it was really unusual to think about allowing people to choose in their government. And the Enlightenment philosophers were stating exactly that. So let's talk about a couple of major philosophers, or what we're going to call the philosophes. Philosophe is a French word for philosopher, and the Enlightenment really reached its height in the mid-1700s in France. It really reached its peak, even though it began much earlier than that, about 100 years earlier or so. Actually, not with Frenchmen, but with, you could argue, Englishmen. And the first guy we're going to talk about is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes was born in 1588 and died in 1679. And if you'll notice, and if you'll look at the dates of his life, he lived during the English Civil War. So I want you to think about how that might have impacted his view on government and the role of government. In fact, the first two guys we're going to talk about really question what was government? What was its purpose? What was the reason that we joined together? And so Thomas Hobbes wrote a book called Leviathan. And Leviathan, he said that we need a monarch. We actually need an absolute monarch. So if you go back and you think about why he, during the English Civil War, thought you might need a monarch, and a strong one at that, and we're going to read these specifically later. Why we might need that, he says it's to have a common power to keep us in awe. Basically, to make us afraid is what he wanted. And so in Leviathan, he differed just a little bit, because prior to this, the justification for absolutism, for monarchies running absolutely, for all power being in hands of one man, was God gave that man the power. That's the theory of divine right, if you'll remember. Well, he says, no. It's not God that gives them the power. It's people that give kings their power. It's called popular. It's a variation on what's called popular sovereignty, or more better known, according to this guy, as social contract. So Hobbes says no longer is God the reason that we need an absolute monarch, but man is, because we give him our power. A student of Hobbes disagreed with him. He said, yes, we all need a government, and yes, we do enter into a contract with our government. But John Locke, from 1632 to 1704, wrote in his two treatises on government, the way to best secure our lives was through what's called a commonwealth, or for our purposes, a republic. Okay, it's the idea behind our government. And Locke said, here's what we have to have. All men are born with certain rights, life, liberty, and property. Does this sound familiar? And government, its job, its sole purpose was to protect your life, your liberty, your freedom, and your property. So John Locke, in two treatises on government, says that government should do that. And that's why we have government. And if government stops doing that, then you should revolt and you should overthrow your government. And to do that, the best government, therefore, according to him, was a republican form of government, or one in which the people chose its representatives and leaders. Going off and taking those ideas and extending them even further was a guy named Baron de Montesquieu. Baron de Montesquieu lived from 1689 to 1755. And Baron de Montesquieu wrote a book called The Spirit of the Laws. And in The Spirit of the Laws, he says that the best kind of government, again, these three guys were all talking about government, why we need government, what is man like without government. Got a great story for you guys to read later. What are we like without government? The reason we need government, Montesquieu said, was to make us all work together and to encourage us to work together. And the best form of government, according to Montesquieu, was that with a system of checks and balances, where the executive power, the power to execute the laws, the legislative power, the power to make the laws, and the judicial power, the power to determine the rightness or justness of those laws, is divided into three separate bodies. Montesquieu thought incorrectly that the British had the best system in their constitutional monarchy. He believed that that was the best system of government to have. He misunderstood how it actually worked, but he did believe that that was the best system. And we get our system of checks and balances from him. Another gentleman is a guy named Voltaire. Voltaire lived from 1694 to 1788, and he was a Frenchman. Montesquieu was from France. Voltaire was a Frenchman. Voltaire wrote a book called Candide. And in Candide, he writes about this guy in Central Europe and how all these bad things happen to him, but he keeps a positive outlook on life. And he is very logical. He is enlightened. It's actually a very short book, really easy to read. And the thing that you most need to know about Voltaire is he was a champion of tolerance and freedom. He believed that whatever you said should be protected. We should have absolute freedom of speech. A famous quote from Voltaire is, I may disagree with what you say, but I wholeheartedly defend your right to say it. And so Voltaire, in his book Candide, his most famous book Candide, tells the story and gives us all these different ideas. And he was, again, a very famous writer. And his book is Candide, and the most thing that he is best known for is the idea of tolerance and freedom, specifically freedom of speech. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the youngest of these guys. He lived much later than most of these. He died in 1778, born in 1712. And his most famous book is called The Social Contract. We talked a little bit earlier, Hobbes and Locke, about the social contract. Well, Rousseau extends on that. For one, he says that men should be allowed to live as close as possible to what we'll call the state of nature. The state of nature is just what we're like without government. And the least government is the best government. But government lives and exists because it has a contract with us. Its contract is that it should protect our rights, etc. Very similar to Locke right here. Very similar to Locke. But the government should, like I said, protect those rights. And should only exist with that social contract, and that we are in change with government, and that the best government is the one that governs or limits our freedoms as little as possible. And so that's Rousseau in the Social Contract in 1762. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day off, and I'll see you guys tomorrow morning bright and early, and we'll talk about the Enlightenment.